And I'll just welcome you to the show and we'll be off and running.
All right.
Well, Chris, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. We are going to get into the public land debate today. And I want to start with your June issue of Trout Magazine. And you wrote, like cicadas emerging from the earth every 15 years or so, these harebrained ideas to sell or transfer public lands arise. Like cicadas, their proponents create a mess before eventually crawling back into the earth.
It's
Can you
true.
explain what happened this summer and what's still going on with public lands and why should we care as anglers?
It's this has been happening almost since so Theodore Roosevelt was really the president, Republican Theodore Roosevelt. He was really the president who it was actually Ulysses S. Grant who quote invented the concept, but it was Theodore Roosevelt who basically said these unobligated, unappropriated public domain lands, they were called, which we had
Hmm.
been settling as we, made our way westward through Manifest Destiny. We should hold some of these. These are, and that was the era when the timber industry was basically, and they're not like this anymore. So I use this word cautiously, but rapaciously moving their way, from the southeast up through New England, across the Great Lakes, and then westward.
Huh.
And he and his friend Gifford Pinchot said we ought to try to protect some of these public lands. And famously, they created something called the Midnight Reserves. So Congress
Huh.
saw that the president was basically creating monuments and designating quote forest reserves, which are now our national forest system lands
Hmm.
today. And they took his authority away. They took, through an appropriations bill that he had to sign, one of these so-called must-sign pieces of legislation. They took that authority away, and so Gifford Pinchot walked across the mall of the mall of the Constitutional Mall down there in D.C. over to the White House, and he and President Roosevelt sat on the floor of the map room of the White House with big maps of the United States and thick markers,
Huh.
and they basically carved off, I think it was 13 million acres of additional forest
Wow.
reserves at
Huh.
just before midnight when the president's ability to do that was taken away. And ever since then, and we've added to our public land domain and we've passed important legislation like the Federal Lands Policy Management Act, which codified that 270 million acres of BLM land should remain in
Hmm.
public hands, and of course the National Forest Management Act, which codified that the national forests should remain in public hands. But really, ever since Roosevelt and Pinchot took that action, there have been these efforts every, as I say, 15 to 20 years to
Huh.
um, grab the lands either and sell them to the highest bidder, which is what we were dealing with this summer, and we can talk more about that, or this is my favorite, to give them, quote, back to the states, which is one
Yeah.
of the biggest canards in the history of conservation, because Western territories, all of the Western domain lands were owned by the original 13 colonies,
Huh.
other than the ones that were acquired by the federal government through treaties or conquest or annexation. And like the Louisiana Purchase or the Gadsden Purchase, where we got Alaska, in the Louisiana Purchase, where we acquired so much of the land west of the Mississippi. And
Sure.
those territories, upon entry into the Union, as a condition of entering the Union as a state, basically gave up their rights to all of the unobligated public domain lands in
Huh.
their territories. And that is what, and then of course we did, dispose or sell of a lot of that during the land rush period. But
Right.
Roosevelt, in his wisdom, realized that the public lands they're the equivalent in America of the grand European museums or the pyramids in Egypt. They are literally the
Huh.
thing that makes us uniquely American. And he said we should hold on to those. And it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be opportunities, especially for communities that are have, public land surrounding them to either trade and acquire some for economic development or housing. But what we saw this summer was really a ham-handed proposal to sell 2 to 3 million acres, and that was written into the
Yeah.
legislation. Two to three
Forced
million
sale,
acres
right? A
for sale,
forced
for
sale,
sale,
not
for sale.
optional. We are
No, no,
selling
no.
this.
It was that's right. It was they had a fractional percent of the Forest Service lands and the BLM lands, and BLM is always treated as the poor, probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but redheaded stepchild, and they're not. They don't get the budget that the Forest Service gets, but the fact that they actually included Forest Service lands in this was almost remarkable. And what was so gratifying was there was just this outpouring of opposition to this
Yeah.
dumb idea.
Right.
And I have it on good faith, and a bunch of Republican senators, including some friends of mine like Senator Risch and Senator Crapo from Idaho, came out against it. But I know for a fact that there were 17 Republican senators who were, if it came to it, would have voted for an amendment to strike that provision from the bill.
Really?
And so
Okay.
this was widely opposed by Republicans and Democrats. And most importantly, maybe from our perspective today, it was the opposition of hunters and anglers that made the key difference.
Is that right?
And
Okay.
oh yeah,
Interesting.
no, they were
Huh.
they were. I mean, this is a community that has for a generation they were ignored by one political party and
Hmm.
taken for granted by the other, and they're slow to anger, but when they rear their head, they rear
Man.
their head. And you better
Yeah.
pay attention because there's a lot of us, 60
Yeah.
million of us. And they made their voice heard. And I think, eventually people convinced the sponsor of the amendment that it was a bad idea and he stripped it from the bill.
He pulled it out. It was that Mike
Well,
Lee.
it was Senator Lee from Utah.
Yeah. What was he thinking? Do you know the guy?
I don't know him. I've testified before him a few times. He's a super smart, very serious man. But he is one of these who just I don't think he believes in this idea of public lands.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pillory him or anything else. He just has a different belief or value set than I do. I think he thinks that there's a long tradition in the state of Utah, which is his state, um, uh, of wanting to, and I say this with air quotes, wanting to take back the
Uh-huh.
public lands. And they've had their state legislature pass, ordinances, and which are meaningless, and they've commissioned funding for lawyers to look at the legality of the question. But the reality is, there is no legal way. You can't give back to the states something they
Right.
never.
Right.
Upon entry into the union, the Constitution of the state of Utah says, "We hereby give up," this is almost a direct quote, "all of our unappropriated public lands within the territory
Yeah. To the federal government.
to the federal government or to the
Okay.
American people." And that's the
So,
point that I like to make. It's like, it's not, the government's not managing these lands for the benefit of the government. These are
right.
our lands. Like,
Right.
they're literally our birthright as American citizens. And it
Right.
is, and frankly, Steve, it's most of the land that most of us will ever own is our public lands. And if we had allowed 2 to 3 million acres of these lands to be sold, you wouldn't. Well, I mean, I'm not sure your financial circumstance, but let me put it this way: I wouldn't have been buying it, and most of my friends
No.
wouldn't be buying it.
Yeah. Not me.
It would have been rich guys and women who would have then put up fences and no trespassing signs
Right.
and no hunting and fishing signs, and we would have been blocked out of our birthright.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's permanent. They're gone forever. Right.
Will Rogers once said, buy land, they're not making it anymore. Once that
Exactly.
land is bought, it's gone. It's not coming back into the public domain.
It just seems so short-sighted. We have a short-term problem. I believe they were trying to fund some of the provisions in the bill, right? And they're going to sell off our lands forever to do something.
Well, look, as I said, I want to be, one of the things I love about the organization I work for is we're very pragmatic. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't circumstances where certain public lands should be traded with the
Mhm.
states or counties or municipalities or even sold. If there, for example, was a housing shortage or a housing crisis and in a certain area, and they needed to pick up
Yeah.
10 extra acres to build some low income housing for workers or medium income housing. That and there's a public process to do that. It happens all the time. It's
Huh.
actually in that Federal Lands Policy Management Act that I mentioned. There's a whole section in the bill that talks about how they should do that in an orderly manner. But it's all in the public. It's all subject to, sunlight and visibility and transparency and
Huh.
and then that means that people like us could weigh in and say, well, wait a minute, okay, I understand what you're trying to do here, but let's not sell the land adjacent to that blue ribbon fishery. Let's maybe keep that off limits to
Yeah.
housing, but let's
Right.
sell this other stuff up here that doesn't have the fish or wildlife values.
Yeah.
And and that's what was missing
Hmm.
from the proposal this summer.
So if this had gone through, who would decide which lands got sold? How would that happen?
The Forest Service and the BLM. I mean, there was one of the things about legislation is they're often skinny on details, um, and then they allow the agencies to write what they call rules or to go through a rule making process.
Yeah.
So those agencies would have written rules for this, but I mean, it's kind of anybody's guess as to how it would have gone. I mean, I having worked for both the Bureau of Land Management, started my career there happily, and the Forest Service, I have great confidence in those people. And those are in fact, I just literally today wrote a blog about public servants and my
Huh.
appreciation for them. As we enter our, I think today's the 9th day of the federal shutdown, but
Yeah.
I think they would have done a really careful job of making sure that they weren't selling off the most important fish and wildlife habitat or drinking
Sure.
water supplies. But who knows, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
politics rears its head everywhere. So it was a little bit inchoate and a little bit unclear as to how that public process would have worked out.
Okay. And so what would this have meant to cold water fisheries and to all of us trout fishermen and salmon fishermen if they started selling off public land? What kind of an impact could it have had?
Well, just look at the Forest Service. 50% of the blue ribbon fisheries in the United States flow across national forest system
Wow.
lands.
Yeah.
And if they got someone in there who, wasn't um, who was more focused on how much revenue can I generate than, the enduring value of keeping public access to those waters.
Yeah.
Think about how many billionaires. I can't remember what the last number was. It was like 1,000 billionaires or something in America. Think about how many of them would have said, "Oh, I mean, a nice place to build
Hey. Yeah.
a $15,000 home, or I'm sorry, 15,000 square foot home,
Yeah.
right along, the Madison or one of these other rivers. It's kind of like,
Creating lots of envy for people like you and me, right?
yeah, exactly. Kelly Creek. I actually don't want to do this. I don't want to name names. I'll get in trouble with my friends. But there's all these incredible native trout fisheries in states like Idaho, Utah,
Yeah.
Montana, Colorado, all over. I mean, all across the country, in New Hampshire and Vermont as well. The Green
Yeah.
Mountain National Forest and the White Mountain National Forest have incredible brook trout fisheries.
Yeah.
And th- those would have been the places people wanted.
Yeah.
I'm afraid, these isolated tracts of public land, which are sometimes fragmented because of
Hmm.
oddities of our history, where we gave away every quarter section to like railroad companies as they
Yeah.
built rail
Yeah.
going west. And I don't think that the rich people would have said, "Well, I'll take one of those off the beaten path, way away from
Right.
cold water, not good hunting. I'll take that. That's the one I want." It's been
Right.
a lot of people have been going there and sighting in their deer rifles for 50 years. I'll take that property. I don't think
Yeah.
so. I don't think
Yeah.
it would have worked that way.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So when I think of our public lands, and I've talked to a lot of, as you have, a lot of anglers from around the world, actually, what we have here in America, I think is just incredible. And how would you characterize that? Like we have versus what the rest of the world has?
We have what the rest of the world wants, is how I would
Hmm.
characterize it.
Yeah.
The most developed nation in the world with the world's best economy and the best freedoms in the world
Yeah.
also happens to have the richest tapestry of public lands and waters that are available to all of us
Hmm.
just by having been born here. I
Yeah.
mean, what a gift that is. And
Yeah.
that's the piece of this that, and I'm sure you must hear it when you talk to anglers who come here from other countries. I remember my friend Tom invited me to fish the River Test with him at this famous holiday. They call it the I think it's the Duffers Weekend.
Huh.
And there's this giant mayfly hatch on all these rivers, but they're all private waters. And
Yeah.
so, we had to pay for each beat that we fished, and there were individual rules on each beat in terms of how you fished. And
Yeah.
I think about what we have here, where it's like, we have I'm not going to do this weekend because I've got this ankle replacement thing I'm dealing with. But
Oh, joy.
if I know it's not, trust me. If I wanted to, I could drive down to the the George Washington Jefferson National Forest in Virginia. I could drive over to the Monongahela if I felt like it.
Yeah.
If I was really ambitious, I could drive a few hours more and go up into Pennsylvania, into the headwaters of the Little Juniata and places like that. And I could fish for free. As long as I bought a license,
Yeah.
I can fish for free. I can fish to my heart's
As
desire.
long as you want.
As long as I want, all day long, all night long. And, so long as I'm abiding by the game rules and buying a license. And I think that sometimes as Americans, we take that for granted. We take for granted this notion that there are tens, hundreds of millions of acres that we all own,
Yeah.
that nobody else in the world, no one else in the world has anything like that. Now, there are countries like Canada where they have forest land and crown lands and things like that, but
Yeah.
nobody has this network of public lands that we
By and
have.
large. Yeah.
And it is, I think it is one of the most important aspects of what it means to be an American. I think that you can look at our success in our economic growth, our success militarily, our success in creating jobs, and track it all back to that public land legacy,
Huh.
because these are the lands like when people from New Jersey, the great state of my home state, when they decided, well, we're going to pack up and get on a stagecoach or a couple of horses and go west to the frontier, St. Louis. And then they got to St. Louis and their kids said, you know what, we're going to go further west into the frontier. And they went over into Montana and
Yeah.
or maybe California even for the gold rush. The attributes that those people developed through that migration westward, those define us as Americans. They are the
Yeah.
defining characteristics that, this whole like American can-do attitude and pick yourself up by your
Sure.
bootstraps. That didn't just happen because the Lord gave it to us. It happened
Yeah.
because of our history. And that history is because of the public lands.
Absolutely. 40 acres and a cow. I'm all
40
set.
acres and a mule. That's right.
And a
Yeah.
mule. That's it.
That's
All
it.
right.
Yeah.
So what do you say to the people, Chris, who say, hey, we've got 640 million acres of public land, and this thing, we're talking less than 1%. What's the big deal? It's mostly isolated, disposable BLM lands. Like, what's the big deal?
Maybe it was, but it wasn't. It was 2 to 3%, to be clear. Um, or no, you're correct. I'm wrong. It was 2 to 3 million acres.
Yeah.
Look, the fact is, if there had been an orderly process where, in a perfect world, a combination of Democrats and Republicans came together, because that's how
Yeah.
we do things in America when things work well, and said, look, we've probably got a million or 2 acres that are just really hard to manage.
Yeah.
Like, they don't make any sense. Remember those, talked about the checkerboard pattern of
Hmm.
our
Yeah.
land tenure maps in the West, especially because of the railroads. Let's talk about a way to, like, what if we sold all, a million or 2 acres of this land that doesn't have high fisheries values, doesn't have high wildlife values,
Hmm.
doesn't have high water values, but we think we could sell it. And maybe we'll create a fund where we use it to clean up abandoned mines, or we
Yeah.
use
Oh,
it
yeah.
to
Sure.
enhance wildlife habitat, or to benefit water quality. That's a conversation we ought to have. We
Right.
really that's
I
a
love
good
that.
conversation. But that's not what this was. This was in the dark of night. Nobody had a chance to read the bill.
Huh.
It just It was unclear about how it would happen. And so I again, as I said earlier, I don't think we should say that there should never be a time when an acre of public land is sold or
Yeah.
traded or transferred. I fundamentally disagree with that.
Hmm.
Uh, but it should be done. You know, sunlight is the best antiseptic. It should be done in full transparency
Yeah.
with a public process where people feel like their voices were heard. We would have joined Trout Unlimited would have joined that conversation in earnest. We have some of the
Yeah.
best GIS capabilities in the world, in my view. We have one of the most incredible GIS teams in the country. We could have created layers where we looked at, lands that are there's a whole bunch of public lands that are blocked up by private lands.
Yeah.
They're
Right.
literally you and I can't go there.
Right.
Um, okay, let's talk about what do we do with those parcels? Let's talk about these other areas where there's not high fish and wildlife and recreation values, drinking water values, and have a conversation, especially
Yeah.
if the
Makes
proceeds of the
sense.
sale go to something reasonable.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, have you ever had that conversation with senators?
No, frankly, I'm embarrassed to say it's a conversation I probably should have had with Senator Lee. Um, but things got so heated and so
Yeah.
pitched then,
You had to move fast.
it was, yeah, we were just trying to, galvanize
Right.
the opposition. It's, uh, you know, you know, for what is the expression? For every season, there is a time.
Take this by the birds, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also Ecclesiastes season, but
Ecclesiastes too.
yeah, but but that's a conversation we should have because
Yeah.
I don't think most sportsmen and women we're not purists about this. There are some of us who are, and they're like,
Hmm.
no, it's not an acre, not ever, and that's just not where I am.
Yeah.
I do think some of these land tenure patterns probably don't make sense to, and in some cases, what you could do, Steve, is maybe so the each of the states. One of the reasons there's a problem of transferring land to Western states in particular, each of the Western states' constitutions. So they were granted a whole bunch of public lands upon entry into the statehood
Right.
as a condition of entry.
For
And
schools, right?
so what they do is they have a constitutional requirement, all of them,
Hmm.
to raise revenues off of those lands for schools and roads.
Yeah.
And which is not how we manage our public lands by and large.
Hmm.
And as a result of that constitutional mandate, in many states, 50, 60, 75% of their state lands have been sold. They sell them to raise revenues for schools and roads.
Well, can't
And
I thought public lands like today, aren't we generating billions and billions of dollars in like mining leases, oil leases, grazing fees, things like it's like 20, 30 billion, I read.
it's a pile. I'm not sure if it's that high, but it's a pile of money that we are generating annually. But they're not mandated to go to schools and roads.
Yeah. Right.
And but on state lands,
Yeah.
every revenue that they generate is mandated by their constitutions to go
Hmm.
to schools and roads. And as a result of that, we've seen many states sell off huge percentages of their state lands to
Yeah.
raise money.
Right.
And that was part of our concern here was that, it's like the great barbecue. We're just going to go barbecue our public lands. And
That's
I don't
just
think it was going to be the incidental lands that would have been sold. It
yeah.
would have been the ones that the billionaires wanted to build
Huh.
trophy home next to a
Yeah.
Blue River trout stream.
Let's shift gears just for a second here. Let's talk about this roadless rule and the push to rescind that. That's another really shocking thing that's going on right now. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's the spawn of the public lands sale proposal. It really is. It's so there are for about 24 years now, we've lived with something called the Roadless Area Conservation Rule, which protected 58.5 million acres of these so-called roadless areas without roads, on the National Forest System. These happen to be some of the highest quality fish and wildlife habitats. And if you want to walk, hunting and angling opportunities
Yeah.
on the planet.
Huh.
They represent less than 2% of the United States landmass,
Yeah.
but 25% of all of the endangered species are found there.
Huh.
More than 60 million Americans get their drinking water from these 2% lands. And
Huh.
importantly, these are lands that are low value, low timber values, because if they had higher timber values, the Forest Service would have cut them years ago.
Yeah.
They have low timber values. They're really hard to access. They're often high elevation with really steep slopes and
Yeah.
granitic, erosive
Uh-huh.
soils. And so what we end up doing is, and then they're hugely controversial. Every time a proposal, the only reason to build roads on national forests by and large today is for timber sales. It's not the case everywhere. Like in
Hmm.
Alaska, it's a little different. But today, almost every road there's 270,000 miles of roads in the national forest system. They were
Hmm.
all built to facilitate the harvest of timber. And um,
Hmm.
all the ones that would be proposed in roadless areas would be to help facilitate timber sales. So we would, as a nation, by getting rid of this rule, we would be allowing for timber sales that will generate less revenue than they cost, that will be wildly controversial,
Huh.
and will almost certainly be ecologically damaging in terms
Yeah.
of having those roads have gravity works cheap. It never takes a day off. Those roads have a tendency to fall off the mountains that they're built on. And what's below the mountain? A creek. And
Ah.
so,
Yeah.
it's just, it doesn't make sense socially. It doesn't make sense economically. And it certainly doesn't make sense ecologically.
Okay, so what do you say to the people that say, hey, we need roads in these roadless areas for fire mitigation. It's going to help the economies, the local economies, and hey, just common sense forest management, right? What do you say to those people?
Well, I'm all for common sense forest management. We were talking about Utah earlier.
Hmm.
So 40% of all of the hazardous fuels, so we call this, I don't want to get too wonky, but just a 2-second history thing here. So most of our Western landscapes evolved with, east of the Cascades Mountains, evolved with relatively frequent fire. And as a result of the Forest Service just doing a great job of suppressing fires to protect people and their property for 100 years, those fires are now overgrown. And so you have what they call too many stems per acre, too many trees per
Ah,
acre.
okay.
And so what they do these things called hazardous fuels treatments to go in and remove some of that biomass, some of that
Yeah.
woody, a lot of it's low value stuff. But and so and they also do things like prescribed fire. These are systems
Yeah.
that evolve with frequent fire. We've put that fire out, and so they try to reintroduce fire in a safe way. So the state of Utah, 40% of all of the hazardous fuels treatments that have occurred in the state of Utah have occurred in roadless areas.
Huh.
28% of all the hazardous fuels treatments in the state of Montana have occurred in roadless
They're
areas.
still doing it.
38% of all of the hazardous fuels treatments in the state of Idaho have occurred in roadless areas.
Huh.
They're still doing it because the roadless rule allows for it to be done.
Ah.
When we wrote that rule, and I should mention that, I was that I was one of the that was one of my babies when I worked for the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah.
I was one of the architects of that rule. But
Huh.
when we wrote that, we wrote it in such a way that we said, look, if you want to go in there, especially if you're adjacent to a community and you want to make that community safer by doing some thinning or doing some prescribed fire, or mastication of wood, go ahead. You
Right.
can do it. That's fine. Just
Yeah.
don't build a road, because in those states that I just mentioned, a road is a permanent mark on the landscape. You can say it's going to be a temporary road,
Right.
but those roads last forever unless you
Yeah.
go in and you spend, you make that timber sale lose even more money
Uh,
by literally removing the road prism off the side of the hill, which is not easy to do.
nobody does that, do they? I mean,
No,
that's rare,
no, I
isn't it?
mean,
Yeah.
only in extreme circumstances.
Yeah. Huh.
And so what I would say to those who say fire is the problem and we need to do hazardous fuels treatments is, you already can,
Yeah.
and where needed, you already are. And the second thing I would say, Steve, is 80% of all the fires in the national forest system are caused by humans. and 80% of those occur within a mile of a road.
Yeah. Yeah.
So putting roads into roadless areas, all you're doing is opening up those areas for more
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing.
Okay. All right. So this is really the big question for me is you've got a couple of issues ago, you guys were talking about champions. This is in Trout Magazine that every
Right
river needs
on.
a champion, right? And
Yes.
your new tagline, I think it even
Yes,
said
I
in one of
love
the
it. I love
articles.
that you've got the magazine. Steve,
Yes,
let's
of
go.
course. Of course. Um, so you've got the U.S. Department of Agriculture trying to rescind this thing, right? So that's not what do we do about it? And then the other one, it's already sort of come and gone as far as the land sale. That's already been removed, but it's going to come up again. It sounds like. What do we
It'll
do as
come up
ag?
again.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I described, as you, when we started off the show, I described that whole land sale thing as like it has a circadian rhythm to it.
yeah,
Because back here, the cicadas emerge from the earth every 15 to 17 years. And
uh,
I remember I started my career, it was the war on the West. And then that morphed into the county supremacy movement. And then that morphed into the whole thing with the Bundys and that whole horrible standoff. And then we had this thing we faced this summer. But here's the thing that people need to understand. Part of what, in addition to this tapestry of public lands that just add to the richness of what it means to be an American, another part of what makes America so great is the fact that we can make our voices heard.
yeah,
And I think there are precious few constituencies that I think can stand up and with a clarion clear voice explain to the administration, this is not in our best interest. We don't want this. And I think the hunting and angling community is one of those, maybe the only one.
mm,
And so, there's going to be the way the bureaucratic process works. And I'm not making fun of this because I'm glad it exists because it allows us to make our voices heard. But they did something called a notice of intent, and they had a
yeah,
very truncated public comment period there that ended last week or 2 weeks ago.
hmm,
It was 21 days. And then what they'll do now is they'll come out with what they call an environmental impact statement, which will look at the benefits of and uh, negatives of their proposal. And then there will be a longer, I hope, public comment period. And TU will be doing our level best to make sure that, every one of our 350,000 members and supporters make their voices heard. And I hope everybody
okay,
on this show checks out tu.org and stays in touch with us because we'll make it easy for you to do that.
okay.
Um, the other
You
thing
do
I'll
make
mention
it, I was going to say, you do make it really easy because there's been lots of times I've just clicked on a button and up comes a page. I just fill in my name, write a few extra things, and it goes off to my congressman.
it's amazing. They do a
Really
great,
easy.
the
Yeah.
team the communications team here does a great job. But there's another point that's important. Remember when we were talking about the public land sales? You asked about, well, Chris, come on, man, it's like a million or 2 acres, like
Right.
out of 600 million. Like, is it really a big deal? And the answer is,
Hmm.
if done in the right way, it need not be a big deal.
Hmm.
The same answer applies here too.
Hmm.
If the administration pivots, and by the way, and I say the administration not without reason, the Forest Service doesn't want to do this.
Huh.
This is not coming from the career professionals at the Forest Service. This is settled law for them.
Huh.
They know that these areas are dogs from a timber management perspective. They know that
Huh.
the controversy that's created by trying to go into those places, it burns the social license that they've earned over the years and makes it harder for them to do the other great work that agency does. But my hope is that because enough of us will raise our voices, that the administration says, okay, well, look, let's pivot. Right now, there's two options on the table. One is they call it rescinding the roadless rule, which means
Yeah.
just take it.
Hmm.
And then the other one is what they call the no action alternative, meaning we're not going to do anything. Psych, just kidding, head fake. But they're not going to take that option. They're required by law to have that.
Hmm.
My hope is that enough of us will make our voices heard, that the administration will say, All right, well, look, we understand you don't like the rescission idea, but it's been 24 years, right? We've gotten smarter in 24 years. I mean,
Hmm.
I hope we have. And we've learned some things about better ways to protect these communities from fire, which is the point you raised. And we've learned better ways to protect the values of roadless areas that we care so much about. How about we have another alternative, sort of like the porridge is just right alternative that takes the benefits of the science and the information that we've gleaned over a quarter of a century and applies it in a more measured way.
Right.
That could be the path through the woods for all of us. And that's the direction that we're trying to push.
What would be a measured way? Why would we want a road in a roadless area? What's a measured road?
So I mean, that's a great question. So I'll harken back. So this policy right now, this proposal rather, it applies to 45 million acres. The reason it's not 58.5 million acres is because the states of Idaho and Colorado back in 2009, they did their own roadless rules.
Huh.
And I was personally a part of both of those. And I was on a 13-person panel that advised the states and the Forest Service on how to
Huh.
do this. And what we did is in places like Idaho, where we protected 8.9 million acres, um, we took about 1.4 million and put them in like a almost a wilderness quality protection. Like right now, the roadless rule allows you to go in and do timber harvest for generally small diameter trees that is expected to be infrequent. It's a
Huh.
higher standard in Idaho for that
Yeah.
1.5 million acres. And those are roadless areas that are adjacent to like the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness, where I shot my first elk.
Huh.
But then there's another category where we looked at, well, let's identify the communities in Idaho that are surrounded or might have roadless areas around them, and then be a little more permissive in those areas so that people can go in and do fuels treatments in a more economical way.
Yeah.
And and we did the same thing in Colorado. And so I think there are approaches. I mean, the administration, I mean, I was going to say tacitly acknowledges it's not even tacit. They exempted Idaho and Colorado, those roadless rules, 4.2 million
Hmm.
acres in Colorado, 8.9 in Idaho, from their roadless rescission. Okay, well, let's take a similar approach and be as thoughtful as we were in trying to accommodate the social mores of those states
Yeah.
in a way that still is, I would argue that that roadless rule that we did in Idaho, which, overturned the rule that I worked on as a kid,
Yeah.
that's more protective of fish and wildlife than the O1 rule.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Um, okay. Well, you've really got my mind spinning here on options. So there could be a happy medium here. There could be some things that we could agree to that make sense for anglers and for everybody here in America.
I mean, this is what we do as a nation, right? And we have
Yeah.
our disagreements. They're often pitched. We're like a big family, and the important thing is at the end we come together and we say, well, what is really the common good that we're after here? And
Huh.
there's going to be certain communities that are adjacent to these roadless areas where maybe we ought to let them be a little more permissive. And then there's going to be other ones where we want to be hyper protective of the water quality values, the endangered species values, the rare plant values, the reference landscape values, the just sense of naturalness and wildness that
Hmm.
these landscapes represent. And there's a way to have that conversation.
Can people today, would it make sense for people today to write their congressman and say, hey, this is coming. We want you to get involved somehow? I mean, it's a USDA thing, right?
If you hunt and you fish, you should absolutely write or if you just care about clean water, if you
Yeah.
care about the outdoors, you care about, then naturalness, wildness, and outdoor recreation, you should all write your congressmen and women. And we make it easy on our website at tu.org. Just go to the
Okay.
bottom of the page. There's a few action alerts down there. Roadless is one of them.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
but
interesting.
everybody ought to do this because you know, Congress controls the purse of USDA. And if enough members of Congress weigh in and say, hey, we're going to cut your budget because we don't think you're doing what our constituents want you to do, they'll pay attention.
They'll pay attention to that.
They
Okay.
are still, look, in England they call their public lands the king's lands.
Yeah.
And I know we have this whole no kings movement here, and I don't want to get into that, but these aren't the king's lands. These are our lands. Like we
Yeah.
literally own these, and we have to make our voices heard on how our lands are managed. If you own 10 acres in West Virginia, and your neighbor decided to go and cut 5 acres of your timber without your permission, you wouldn't allow that.
No.
You would be exercised, or you'd strike an agreement where it's like, okay, but I want this much money for that, or whatever, however you do it. But that's what we have to do here. This is no more complicated than that. There is a proposal that will dramatically change the status quo on our lands, the lands that we own. And I just can't overstate how important it is that people make their voices heard.
Okay, there you go, folks. Get busy, right? It really doesn't take a long time. It's quick and easy to get on the TU site and write your contract. I've done it many, many times. They make it super easy. So, Chris, you got another minute?
Of course, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm kind of intrigued by your basketball coaching career in New Jersey. And
So
because, huh?
yeah. So I played at St. Peter's, and we played against St. Anthony's, which was coached by the legendary, I'm forgetting Mr.
Bob
Hurley.
Hurley.
Bob Hurley, yeah.
Yeah.
Bob Hurley, who's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, and his son also played there. But my coaching career actually started here in D.C.
Huh.
And I have coached my oldest boy, Wiley, and then who's now 22, and I've coached Casey, who's now 19,
Huh.
and I coached Henry Trace. And Henry Trace's team last year, and he's a very good ball player. He plays for our biggest public school in the district here. They won the championship last year for our rec league basketball team.
Yeah.
And the biggest regret I have in hoop is that my father, who was voted one of the 100 best basketball players in the history of Newark, New Jersey,
Really?
which is a basketball rich area,
Huh.
while he was still alive. The weekend that he and mom were going to come down and visit was for Wiley's championship game and Casey's championship game, and COVID stopped them from coming.
Oh my gosh. That's too bad.
And we never even played the championships because of COVID. But that's it's been a joy. I think about how important coaches were for me, guys like Jerry Bellotti, who was my football coach in high school, and many others. And it's such a gift to be able to give back.
Yeah, for sure.
And live your dreams, hopefully not too aggressively through your kids.
You bet. You bet. You got to care less than the kid does. That's what I've found.
One of the best lessons in coaching I ever took was when my son Wiley was my oldest he was the best baseball player. And he was probably 9, and he was their number 3 hitter and their best pitcher. And he hit a triple in the bottom of the games only went to 6 innings then. He hit a triple in the bottom of the 6th that put us up by a run. And then he gave up the winning run, or I guess in the top of the 6th he did that. Then he gave up the winning run in the bottom of the 6th. And all of us parents were just, heartbroken that the kids had lost the championship.
Oh.
And as soon as the coach, one of the other coaches, gave these great words of comfort to the kids, and mostly the parents needed it, Wiley runs over to the ball bucket and he throws me a baseball, and he says, let's go have a catch.
Yeah, is that right? He didn't care. He was like, yeah, whatever,
Dad, it's a game. It's a game.
Wow.
We're having fun, right? Let's keep having fun.
Well, did you ever have to kick a parent out of a game as a coach?
Oh yeah.
Nobody
has ever asked me this story. So when I was 25, 24, I was making ice cream in New Jersey at a famous place that had been open since 1909. I'm sad that it closed when I was the plant manager, but it was called Grunning's Ice Cream and Candy in South Orange, New Jersey. And but I was asked by, I think, a couple of parents went to my mom and said, hey, can Chris coach? We need a coach. There's too many kids on the baseball league. So every coach picked two kids to give to me. So you can imagine most of the coaches didn't pick their best two players.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I, I
Scrub.
had I had an expansion team, and and I think that enough years have passed that there's no way that this, and I'm not going to mention his name anyway, but there's no way this father would hear this. But we had this kid who was a catcher and he was a good hitter, big kid, and his father was a big guy, and we pitching at that age is a premium. You can walk in 6 runs, and we were in a game. We were winning an odd game. I think we won 2 games that whole year, but we happened to be winning this game, and our pitcher walked in the winning run or
Oh,
the go ahead run, and the catcher stood up and yelled something like, "You stink, Jimmy!"
to the
You know,
kid, the
to the
pitcher.
kid. His cat, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
pitcher of the catcher yelled, "You stink! Throw the ball, over the plate." And so I called timeout, and I walked in, and I grabbed the kid by the arm and the catcher, and I said, "You're out of the game." I said, "Timeout," and I said, "Go take your stuff off. You're not coming back in." And I told another kid to put the catcher's equipment on, and his father stood up, big guy. And I was, I had played football in college. I was in good shape. And
Yeah.
his father stood up in the stands and started cursing me out.
Oh
Like, "You're
boy.
taking out the best hitter on our team. What's effing wrong with you?" And
Really?
and so I looked up, I turned my hat around, I turned my whistle around on my back. I walked up with the clipboard in my hand and I said, I'm not going to use the language I use, but I said, "Hey, here's the clipboard. I'll give you the whistle if you want, but you need to shut the up for the rest of the game." And I said it right to his face so nobody else heard him. And he just looked at me like he went white and he sat down and that was it.
Really? How about that? Sometimes you got to punch a bully in the face, you
Oh, well,
know?
he was wrong. I mean, you can't be cursing in a little league base.
Wow. No kid. Right. Are you a Bruce Springsteen fan?
Huge,
Okay. All
huge.
right.
You
You,
kidding?
you ever been to Asbury Park?
Dude, come on.
All the time.
My grandfather lived in Point Pleasant. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the shore is like we go every year to the shore still. I don't go
Oh,
We don't
dear.
go to Asbury, we don't go to rent at Asbury Park, but
Yeah.
we go to, I'm not going to say that it's between Sea Isle City and Atlantic City,
Yeah.
or Ocean City. No, yeah,
Okay. I read his autobiography. Have you read that thing yet? I listened to it on tape actually. It was like
yeah, he's
32 hours
incredible.
or so. It was really well done. I
Yeah,
enjoyed it. So
yeah.
anyway, well, hey, we're running out of time here, Chris. So appreciate you spending an hour with me on the Destination Angler podcast, Chris. And I think it's great. We've been able to maybe fill in some people on what's really going on here and what TU's position is and what they can do about it.
Awesome, Steve. It's been a true pleasure. I enjoyed it, and I hope we get to talk. We can actually talk about some fishing next time.
Maybe next time. We'd love to have you back. So, folks, thanks you for listening for another episode of the Destination Angler. This is a special edition, but please still, if you've got some comments or suggestions, I'd love to hear from you. That's Haigh at destinationanglerpodcast.com. And hey, till next time, tight lines, everybody. Pause here for a second.